Good to be back with you, Mario.
Absolutely appreciate that. And before we talk about the balance of power in Washington, let's first talk about your individual election results here in Kentucky. You overwhelmingly won re-election to another 2-year term in the U.S. House. So what do you attribute your election night success to?
I'm humbled by the result, obviously, Mario. I really appreciate the confidence that the people of Central Kentucky have offered in terms of sending me back to Washington to represent them, to fight for them and their families in the Congress. And what I heard on the campaign trail and what I continue to hear from my constituents is a lot of concern about the direction of our country, especially from the standpoint of our economy. Inflation has really taken its toll on Kentucky families and American families across the country. Our purchasing power is way down because inflation is at a 40-year high. The average household is now paying about $6,000 to $8,000 more for the same goods and services that they were purchasing just 2 years ago. So our focus has got to be, number one, on getting inflation under control, reducing prices across the board. Everything costs more in America today because of bad policies that really resulted from one party control in Washington. And the good news about this election is we no longer have one party rule in Washington. We're going to have divided government. We're going to have checks and balances. And the new Republican majority in Congress is going to be able to stop the overspending in Washington, which has contributed significantly to the excess demand and the inflation crisis that we have. The other part, of course, is on the supply side. The other part of the story is on the supply side. And there again, the Biden administration and the Democrat majority in Congress contributed to this problem on the supply side, the constraining supply of labor by paying people to not work, constraining the supply of energy by declaring war on American energy in terms of canceling the Keystone XL pipeline, refusing to issue lease sales and permits for new drilling projects onshore, offshore, on federal lands. And then the weaponization of financial regulation to choke off financing and capital to American energy companies. That's why gas prices are through the roof. And whether it's in Nicholasville or Lexington, Georgetown, Mount Sterling, Winchester, Lawrenceburg, my constituents are feeling the pain at the pump. We're expecting the highest energy prices in a decade. This winter, heating our homes is going to be much more expensive. So, Mario, job number one is focusing on bringing down inflation, stopping the spending spree in Washington, producing more energy, getting the American people back to work, producing more supply of labor and energy, and then onshoring and nearshoring our supply chain so that we're no longer dependent on China, bringing back those manufacturing jobs to the United States, and stopping the threat of higher taxes, which has impeded the business investment that we need to repair our supply chain. All of that will go into the Republican Commitment to America agenda, which will fix inflation for the American people.
And we'll talk too about some of those items included in the Commitment to America, some of the legislative priorities. But I did want to ask you one other question about this election cycle. How did it compare to previous years? Obviously, you've been running for several years and been in office serving the 6th District. But how did this election cycle compare to years past?
Well, I've never had a victory this resounding. I've never had a margin of victory this robust and this large, and it's a credit to my staff and the people, the public servants who work for us. There's no way I could have earned that margin of victory without a lot of Democrats and independents, non-Republicans, supporting our reelection. And I think the reason why there were so many of my constituents who don't always agree with every vote that I take, and Democrats who supported me, is that they recognize that we're working for Kentucky. We're fighting for those signature industries in Kentucky. We're a champion of the bourbon distilling industry, of the auto manufacturing industry, of the horse industry, those industries that really give our people opportunities. And our constituent service, whether it's for veterans or for senior citizens, or ordinary everyday constituents who have difficulties or challenges with federal agencies, we fight for Kentucky families, and we don't ask what your party registration is. If you live in the 6th District, we are fighting for you. That's a credit to my staff and the people who work in our office. And I think the people of the 6th District rewarded us for that approach to constituent service.
I also want to ask you, too, before we get to a break, there's a lot of things that have been outspoken on, and I want to get your comments on the rail strike vote that's taking place. Lawmakers are debating a bill that will put into place a tentative agreement by the Presidential Emergency Board to help avoid a rail strike that could impact the U.S. economy. Where do you stand, and what are your thoughts on this?
Well, Mario, when you talk about supply side constraints contributing to inflation, a rail strike would be a disaster for our country in terms of impeding the flow of goods, especially including energy, because the railroads are so critical for that. So a strike would not be in the interest of fixing inflation, certainly in the short term. But I worry about the long term as well. And I think one of the reasons why you've had this protracted labor dispute, frankly, is because the Biden administration has tried to has intervened and tried to put its thumb on the scale in favor of the unions, giving them false hope that they're going to get unreasonable concessions from the railroads themselves. So I think intervention in this private dispute has actually created a lot of the problem. So I don't think Congress should be setting the precedent that every time there's a labor management dispute, the unions can run to Congress or run to the president to get concessions, or to use Congress as leverage to get concessions. So at the end of the day, I do believe this strike will be avoided, and that's a good thing. But we also don't want, for the long run, the inflation situation to be exacerbated because unions think that they can always extort concessions by running to Congress or running to a pro-labor president to extort concessions from a private sector employer. That's not a good precedent. We need a resolution, and the resolution should be in the private sector.
And we need it.
Good to be with you, Mario.
I want to talk with you next about, there's obviously a lot of people talking about what's happening in China right now as it relates to protesters, peaceful protesting in China over COVID restrictions. What are your thoughts on what's going on over there and their perspective from the U.S.?
Well, as you mentioned, I am the ranking member of the National Security Subcommittee on the Financial Services Committee. I serve on the Asia Pacific Subcommittee of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and I serve also on the China Task Force. So I'm keenly interested in tracking what's happening in the People's Republic of China. And I'm very distressed that the current administration is not standing up for the people in China. The Chinese people are crying out for freedom right now, and they are experiencing a crackdown the likes we haven't seen since Tiananmen Square. The zero COVID policies, the brutal repression that's going on in China right now is quite simply a violation of human rights. And we've seen this consistently from the Chinese Communist Party, whether it's in the Xinjiang province with the Uyghurs and the genocide that's happening there, the aggression directed towards the democracy of Taiwan, and the malign conduct and the military exercises that we see in the Strait of Taiwan, the Belt and Road Initiative, the theft of intellectual property, the forced transfer of technology, the economic warfare, the buildup of the Chinese Navy. All of this signals to us that we need more deterrence. I traveled with a bipartisan delegation to Taipei and Taiwan back in September, where we heard firsthand that we need more deterrence for our friend and ally and partner in the democracy there in Taiwan. What they asked for is accelerated military sales to strengthen that deterrence. We also need, and what they asked for was a reversal of the Biden administration policy to exclude Taiwan from the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. We need more economic integration with the people of Taiwan. We need a bilateral trade agreement with Taiwan. All of this would strengthen deterrence. And what we're seeing right now with this zero COVID policy, is brutal repression of people who are just simply asking for basic dignity and respect. And what it shows is that the authoritarian tactics of the Chinese Communist Party are not going unchallenged, and that the regime in Beijing is not popular with the Chinese people. And I fear that we're losing a golden opportunity to stand with the people of China against the repressive and authoritarian regime in Beijing, General Secretary Xi and the Chinese Communist Party. And President Biden is simply not making any noise in terms of standing with the people of China against the authoritarian dictatorship in Beijing. And this is a consistent pattern with Secretary Blinken, with President Biden. Biden was with President Xi in Indonesia for a summit just last month. And once again, we did not see this president projecting strength. We saw this president projecting weakness, not confronting the Chinese Communist Party when it comes to the genocide in the Xinjiang province against the Uyghurs, not confronting President Xi on the crackdown and the zero COVID policy, not confronting the Chinese when it came to their deception related to the origins of COVID, not confronting General Secretary Xi when it comes to the flood of fentanyl that's coming across our open southern border because of the fentanyl that's being manufactured in China, not confronting the Chinese communist regime when it comes to the theft of intellectual property and the forced transfer of technology and the academic espionage by Chinese at American universities. There's a lot that we need to do in terms of confronting China. And I think the biggest threat in the near term, Mario, is a move on Taiwan, and we need immediate action to accelerate foreign military sales and foreign military financing to that island democracy to strengthen our deterrence.
From Washington, D.C.
Thank you so much for having me.
And our final few moments with you, I want to ask you quickly about the ESG movement, the environmental social governance. I know that you've been mentioning that it's and been outspoken that it jeopardizes economic security. Talk with us about that in about a minute or so, in your perspective.
This is going to be a major focus of the House Financial Services Committee Republicans to do the oversight that needs to be done both on the private sector actors that are engaged in this movement, the so-called environmental, social, and governance investing movement, or ESG, and also the regulators who are getting in on this act, the Securities and Exchange Commission, which has issued a 530-page monstrosity of a regulation that would require more disclosures by public companies of their ESG asset allocation. Why this is a problem for retail investors trying to struggle to save for college for their kids or trying to save for retirement is that these asset managers are prioritizing politics ahead of investment returns. And at a time when inflation is high and we've lost so much value in the stock market, 25%, the stock market is down over the last year. And as the Fed continues to tighten monetary policy, the equity markets are going to continue to struggle. We need financial performance. The American retail investor deserves financial performance. And ESG is steering investors, many times unwittingly and without consent, into funds that are less diversified. They are higher fee and lower return. And many studies have been conducted that show that ESG funds underperform the market as a whole. I think this is a scandal. ESG is a cancer within our capital markets, and we're going to be fighting to expose this cancer within our capital markets. This FTX scandal with the crypto exchange that just went bankrupt. It's a total fraud, and it is the poster child of ESG. We need to expose the scandal of ESG, and we need to get back to basics where Americans' retirement savings and college savings are invested in diversified portfolios based on maximizing shareholder returns instead of this stakeholder capitalism where woke asset managers are allocating capital based on politics towards trendy, liberal, progressive causes instead of focusing on financial performance for the American people. We're going to be focused on that oversight and get back to basics and force the financial services industry to do the right thing instead of elevating progressive politics ahead of retirement security for the American people.